Hey everyone, I am Chase at Rocky Mountain ATV MC, and today we're going to teach you some basics about suspension and help you set up and understand your compression and rebound. All right everyone, so today in this video we want to share with you just some good general common information about suspension, more specifically your compression and rebound. We just want to help you understand a little bit more. I know a lot of riders, when it comes to suspension, they can be a little bit intimidated when it comes to adjusting and tuning their suspension, especially if you don't really understand it all that well. But the truth is, it's really not that difficult to fine tune and set up your suspension as long as you understand the basics of how it works. And the beauty about suspension and adjusting your clickers, whatever it is that you're doing, is that no matter what changes you make, as long as you know what your base setting is, and what I mean by your base setting is you look at your owner's manual, they'll give recommended base settings, or if you've had your suspension revalved, they'll give you a recommended base setting. But any changes you make, if you're not happy with the direction that you're going, you can always just go back to your zero or your base setting and start over. So don't be afraid to change your clickers and then go back to your base setting if you're not happy with it. So we're just going to talk about really compression and rebound today and help you out and understand that so you know how to make those adjustments and tune your suspension. All right, so first things first, you got to set yourself up to win. And what I mean by that is you want to make sure that you as a rider, your weight and your skill level match what the bike is set up for. Because every bike, you have to remember, every bike that comes from a manufacturer, they do a lot of testing. And bikes these days are so good stock suspension, but they do have to do their spring rates and their valving for their suspension to try and cater to a pretty large window of riders because they want to be comfortable for as many people as they can. But not every rider that buys a bike fits the category or that window of the riders that the manufacturer is trying to target. So it's really important. You got to make sure that your spring rates and your valving are correct for your weight and also for your skill level. You know, if you're a 150-pound rider hopping on a 450, probably going to be too stiff for you. You're going to want to go softer springs, softer valving. If you're a 200-pound plus rider hopping on a 250, well, it's probably going to be too soft and you're going to want to go stiffer. So your spring rates, okay, your springs and your fork and your shock are going to help support the weight of the bike as well as the rider. And then your valving is going to control how fast your suspension, your forks and your shock, they compress and they rebound. And the way that works is as the suspension compresses, the oil inside your suspension goes through a piston and then it's controlled by the valving. It's called a valve stack. You have these little round shims and those will actually control how fast or how slow that oil works its way through the stroke. And that's going to be your valving. So you got to remember, it's very important that you have it set up, that you have it set your spring rate and your valving set up to your riding and your weight. Now, an easy way to find out if you need a different spring rate is just simply checking your sag. So whether you get a bike brand new or used, first thing you want to do is check your sag. You know, look at your owner's manual, service manual, because they will give a window of where your sag should be. But checking your sag will tell you, if you need a softer or stiffer spring. We have a great how-to video where we show you step-by-step how to do that if you're not sure. But going along with that, okay, you got to remember that spring rates and valving, they're meant to work together. So if you get on a bike and you're too heavy for the spring rate and you got to go up 2 or 3 spring rates to get it to where it needs to be, well, you got to remember that by doing that, the valving was meant to work with that stock spring rate. So if you go way stiffer, you're going to want to redo your valving to make it match your spring rate. So just keep that in mind. So first thing, set yourself up to win. Make sure you have the right spring rate and the valving for your weight and your skill level. All right, so now that you got yourself set up to win, you know the basics there. Let's just talk about a few terms that I'm going to say a lot in this video. And the first one is stroke. So what I mean by stroke is the travel of your suspension. So when you're riding your bike, let's say you go off a jump and as you land and your suspension compresses, that is your compression stroke. So the suspension is coming down. And then your rebound and your rebound stroke is as the suspension returns back to full length. So that's your compression is going down, rebound is coming up or returning, and then the stroke is the full travel that you're getting there. So those are really the terms that you got to understand before you try and adjust anything. So with that out of the way, let's talk about, tuning your suspension, troubleshooting it, and knowing what to look for. A pretty common thing that a lot of riders talk about is, oh, my suspension feels harsh. And there's a lot of different things that go into suspension, guys. I'm not gonna be able to talk about every single thing, but there are a couple common things that are really gonna help you out to know how to make your suspension maybe more compliant, feel a little bit more plush and more comfortable for you. And also, you gotta remember that with every fork and every shock, there's a sweet spot in that travel, the stroke that you wanna live in. You want it to stay there. That way it's gonna feel plush, it's gonna be compliant, it's gonna be comfortable. So as a rider, if you're out there riding and you feel like the initial part of your stroke and the fork and the shock is stiff and you feel like it's harsh, those smaller bumps, that little chatter, you get a lot of feedback and it just doesn't feel very good, Well, an easy fix for that is just to soften your compression. And by softening your compression, whether it's on your fork or your shock, all you're gonna do is just take that adjuster, and we talk about clicks. So you just wanna go 1 to 2 clicks out. And remember, we talked about valving. When you soften your compression, you go 1 to 2 clicks out or counterclockwise. What you're doing is you're allowing more oil to pass through that piston and that valve stack, which will help it move easier. So you wanna soften your compression. Now, a common issue that I see a lot of riders run into, and a misconception that's out there, is a lot of times a rider will go out and ride and he feels like his fork or maybe his shock is harsh. He gets a kicking sensation. He feels like it's not absorbing, the bumps the way it should. So initially what a rider will do is they'll go softer on their compression. So they'll go out a few clicks. They go out and ride, and going softer will help that initial part of the stroke feel better. But as you start to hit those bigger bumps, they come back in and say, man, it still feels harsh. So what they'll do at that point is they'll go softer on compression, and then they'll go softer again. But the problem that you're creating by doing this is that the softer you go on compression, the more you're bypassing the initial part of the stroke, because you're letting so much oil go through that piston in your valve stack. And what happens is now you're riding too low in that stroke, and you're living down there at the bottom of your compression. And when you're down there towards the bottom, that's where it really ramps up with your valve stack, and that's where it's gonna start to feel harsh, because as you get towards the bottom of the stroke, that's there to help with bottoming resistance, and it's not gonna feel very plush. So in turn, what you actually need to do in a lot of situations is, rather just going softer and softer to try and make it feel more comfortable, is you actually might need to go a little bit stiffer. So what I would say is, if you're having that concern where you're going softer on compression is not helping, go stiffer. Go back to your base setting, and then go 2 to maybe 4 clicks stiffer on your compression, whether it's your fork or your shock, and see if that helps fix it. Because by going stiffer, what you're doing is now you're gonna have more hold up. In other words, what I mean by hold up is your stroke is gonna stay higher up, your travel is gonna stay higher up in the stroke, and that's where you're gonna find that sweet spot. So try that. If you're going softer on compression, it's not fixing the issue. You feel like your forks are harsh. Maybe you're getting kicks with the rear end, it's kicking side to side or kicking you up. Well, go stiffer on your compression and see if that helps fix the situation. So now we got compression out of the way, let's talk about rebound real quick. So rebound, like I mentioned earlier, it controls how fast your suspension returns back to its full travel. In other words, if you hit a big bump or a jump, okay, your suspension compresses, and rebound is how fast it returns. Now, rebound is something a lot of riders might not mess with too much. A lot of riders will mess with compression, but they tend to stay away from rebound because maybe they don't understand it too much, or they don't know whether they should go in and slow down the rebound or go out and speed it up. But you got to remember that rebound is essential, and it's synonymous when it comes to traction and keeping your tires planted and getting that power to the ground. So what a lot of riders will do, and this is pretty common mostly, it's more common with the shock, is if you're coming through some bumps, maybe some whoops like we have here at OCA today, and you feel like the rear end is kicking up really hard, or maybe it's kicking side to side, well, the initial thought that most riders have is they say, you know what, I need to slow down my rebound and deaden that feel so I'm not getting that bucking sensation. But what needs to happen in a lot of cases is, rather than going stiffer and slowing it down, you actually need to open it up, go counterclockwise on your rebound, and speed that shock up. That way, it's returning faster to the ground, because if you hit one bump, your suspension compresses, but if it can't return fast enough before the next bump, well, just like with compression that's too soft, now you're gonna be living in the, the bottom of that stroke where it's gonna start to feel harsh, and eventually you just run out of travel, and all that energy, rather than the suspension absorbing it, goes into the bike and then into the rider. So if you run into that issue where you're going through some whoops, or you feel like the back end is kicking side to side or up and down, and you feel like your compression is good, well, adjust your rebound. Try going slower or faster. Remember, you can always go back to your base setting, but if you slowed the rebound down and you still feel like you're getting that kicking, it could be that you just need to speed your rebound up to help that tire return and utilize that suspension as much as possible. Just remember that a slow rebound with a soft compression is going to compound the problem to where you're going to be too low in that stroke too much. Now, the last thing I want to touch on with rebound is with the forks. So remember, like I said earlier, guys, don't be afraid to adjust it, see what works and what doesn't. But something that I've found for me helps a lot to know if I need to speed up or slow down my rebound on my forks is, if you're in a high-speed section that's got a lot of chatter, maybe a lot of braking bumps, and you feel like you're getting that head shake where the front end starts to feel twitchy and you don't have a lot of control, well, something that can help with that I've found is you speed up your rebound. A lot of riders will actually slow it down because they feel like the rebound's too fast and it's making the front end not stay planted. Well, typically, in those situations where you have a lot of bumps at high speed, again, if your tire is not returning fast enough to the ground, you're not, living in that right part of the stroke. So try speeding up your rebound a couple clicks to help the front tire track better, and that way your suspension is going to better absorb every single bump that you're hitting as you're doing that. Hey everyone, so while we were putting together this video and getting it all edited up, we realized there's a couple things that we forgot to mention that we want to show you right now. First is where your clickers are located on your forks and your shock, and also we want to briefly go over high-speed compression on your shock as well. So when it comes to your clickers, we'll start with forks. Now in most cases, your compression adjuster on your fork is going to be on the top, and then the rebound adjuster is actually going to be down here on the bottom of your fork leg. But just keep in mind that this isn't going to be the same for every fork. For example, KTMs that have, say, a Force CS fork, you're going to have compression on the top on one fork, and then the other fork is going to be for your rebound, and both those clickers are located on the top. So if you're not quite sure where your clickers are or which one does what, best advice I can give, go look at your owner's manual. Now on the shock, in most cases, your low and high speed adjusters are going to be located near the shock reservoir. So on this bike here, you can see the low speed compression is going to be on the inner diameter. You can use a flathead screwdriver to adjust. The high speed compression is going to be the outside this outside nut. Now when it comes to rebound, in most cases, you're going to find the rebound adjuster down at the bottom on the clevis on your shock. But remember, just like with the forks, it might differ bike to bike, so if you're not quite sure, look at your owner's manual. Now when we talk about high-speed compression, a couple of things we want to cover here. Don't get high-speed compression confused with how fast you're moving in terms of miles per hour. Rather, it's a measurement of how fast the shock shaft is moving. So think of your abrupt high-speed landings or maybe those sharp square edge bumps while you're out riding. So for example, if you're out riding, you come off a jump, you feel like you're bottoming too easily, or if you feel like the rear end is maybe sitting a little bit too low under acceleration, well, what you can actually do is stiffen up the high-speed compression and go in. Or maybe you're coming through a corner, you have some square edge bumps coming out, some acceleration chop, you feel like it's really harsh. What you would do then is actually soften up the high speed compression to make it a little bit more comfortable. Now when it comes to adjusting that high speed compression, in most cases, this isn't going to be by clicks, it's going to be rather by turns. And a good rule of thumb for adjusting that is you want to go a quarter to a half turn at a time when you're adjusting that high speed compression. So again, that's where your clickers are located. Now let's get you back out to the track. Just remember, suspension, there is a lot to it. The things that we talked about today, very basic, but like I mentioned, as long as you have a good understanding of how things work and a general idea of that, then you're gonna have more confidence to adjust your suspension, tune it, to get it set up how you like it and what's gonna make you more comfortable and also faster as a rider. But those are some of my basic tips and troubleshooting ideas when it comes to compression and rebound. Now I'm sure you guys out there, you know a lot about suspension as well. So leave your comments below. Let us know what you guys have found with your compression rebound, things to look for or things you can find on the track, maybe the desert, the woods, you know, things to indicate if you're too soft or too stiff on compression, or if you need to go faster or slower on rebound. What helps you out, and that's gonna help other riders out who are looking for those same answers. If you guys like this video, get subscribed to our YouTube channel because we're constantly doing product spotlights, how-to videos, tip videos, excuse me, just like you saw today. I'm Chase, we'll see you on the trails.